wanted to talk about the phase that I'm getting into with my work. I just got the edits back from my professional editor on book 3 in my sci-fi trilogy, which is super exciting because it's one of the final stages that I go through when I'm producing and publishing a book. But it has been pretty scary because I've forgotten what it's like to be at this part. I feel like I keep saying that in every video that I'm putting out. I've forgotten what it feels like to be here, but I really, truly have forgotten about the stages. And I think that there's something to be said for keeping your work going, like keeping the momentum of writing and producing and publishing books, especially as an indie author, because if you take pauses, or if you take big breaks, or if you decide to put your work aside for an extended period of time, you come to this place where you kind of forget all of the different stages. And that can be difficult because you feel like, at least I feel like, I've already gone through these processes multiple times before and I should be comfortable with every phase that I'm going through. And that does make a certain amount of sense, but it's not realistic when I have taken such a long break from publishing my last book to finally publishing this third book in the trilogy. And I have to be kind to myself when it comes to this concept. I have to embrace this period where I am relearning the process. I have to be okay with the fact that I might be a little bit of a novice, or I might be becoming a novice again, where I have to remind myself how everything works. If you're not familiar with my editing process and how I go about publishing a book from start to finish, generally, once I finish my first draft, I do a couple rounds of edits myself, and then it will go to beta readers. I do some more edits. And once I'm finally in this portion of the process where I'm fully getting ready to publish, it goes to a professional editor. And this is not a developmental editor. I actually do all the developmental edits myself. It's part of the reason that I spend so much time on plot work before I even start to draft. Because once I get that full draft done, I don't want there to be a lot of heavy lifting when it comes to the plot and the pacing and things like that. So when it is ready to go to my professional editor, I want everything to be set to where all she focuses on is line and copy editing. Generally, by this point, I feel really confident about the overall structure of my work. And that is a big relief at this point, because when you get to this place where you are working on line and copy edits, I have found that it is really beneficial for me to be super confident in how the story as a whole is crafted. But ultimately what I'm paying for is to work on the refinement of my book, the refinement of my work, and the more minute details that really make it shine and make it really feel polished. So what I use my editor for is a combination of line and copy editing to make sure that the prose really flows and everything reads to a reader as professional as possible. And my editor is good, like really good. She actually works for one of the big publishing houses and does freelance work on the side. So I feel really confident asking her questions about things that are going on in the trad industry. And I feel like she does a great job of making sure that my work is up to that caliber. And that was really something that I was looking for when I set out to find an editor in the first place. I wanted someone who really knew what they were doing and were familiar with the types of books that I want my indie published book to be able to stand alongside. And if you know anything about me by now, it is that I do my research. I spent an inordinate amount of time trying to narrow down which editor I wanted to work with and make sure that not only was her work impeccable and up to par with what I was looking for, but that she understood what I needed from her and understood the tone I was going for and wasn't going to be so aggressive to the point where I felt like I lost my voice. And this editor has been the same on all 3 of the books that I've worked with in this trilogy, and I really have valued that she has made space in her schedule to work with me so that I feel like my tone and the way that I'm going about editing my book is true to my style. And she has made every single one of these books immeasurably better than what they were when I sent them to her at the start. Not to mention the fact that working with an editor who is in the traditional publishing sphere, I feel like that has really been able to teach me so many things about what industry standards are and what to expect from an editing pass, and how to go about making my work as polished as possible when it comes to the standards for the industry. And I'm so grateful for her experience, because I really feel like if I have any questions, she's always there to answer them, and I feel really confident that my work stays up to date with the norms in the trad industry, which is something that I'm cognizant of as an indie author. I don't want to publish my work fully outside of the existing structure and systems. Ultimately, I would love to be a hybrid author, so I want to make sure that my work illustrates that, and that my work is as relevant as anything else that you would find from one of the big publishing houses. And I feel confident that any questions I ask her, because she is working in that trad space for her day job, that she knows exactly what she's talking about and gives me the best advice that I could get. Okay, so why did I want to talk about editing at all today? The truth is, I got my edits back from her about 2 weeks ago, and I had been sitting on them without even opening the manuscript at all. I encountered this feeling of like visceral fear when I got that email from her, and I read her editor's letter, and I kind of like glanced at the manuscript and saw all of the edits immediately, and I froze. I'm not certain why. Probably has something to do with the big pause that I had in my career for a while. Like, I wasn't super confident in this concept that I knew what I was doing. And I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that I, again, forgot what it felt like the emotions that come along with getting edits on a piece of art that I have spent so many hours and so much of my life creating. And to be honest, I wanted to film this video a long time ago, but I have even been putting that off because even talking about it is intimidating. And to be honest, I feel like I'm going through that phase right now that inevitably comes with every piece of work where I feel like what I have created is a steaming pile of hot garbage. And I know that that's not reality. That happens to everyone. There are days where I feel like what I've written is amazing, and there are days where I am not confident at all. And I happen to be going through one of those phases when this email came through. And I think that that is not really great for my personal belief in myself, but it is something that I have to be aware of, and something that I have to remind myself is normal so that I can embrace it and work through it. Because I don't really think that this phase ever goes away. I have listened to enough podcasts and watched enough interviews and been to enough conferences and seen people speak, seen authors speak, to know that everyone has these moments, whether you are a New York Times bestseller or if you haven't published at all. Everyone goes through a phase or multiple phases where they are not confident in the work that they're producing. And you have to kind of embrace that stage. Maybe not embrace it, but at least be aware of the fact that it is part of the process. What inevitably ended up happening is that I got this email and I didn't open it, and I kind of sat on it for a week and didn't touch it because I was too scared of it. One of the caveats to indie publishing is that I am essentially all on my own. I don't have a team of people there who are continually bolstering me up and giving me that external validation. I have to figure out ways to give that to myself. And honestly, I think community has been a real blessing in that sense. I think, especially as an indie author, it can be very lonely. And if you don't have a group of people around you who are encouraging you, you can kind of get stuck in these phases of fear, in these phases of, a lack of self-esteem or self-belief. And my writing group and the friends that I've kind of made there have almost, I feel like, supplemented the elements that you would get from having a full agent and a full publishing house behind you. Because what inevitably ended up happening is I went to writing group. I told everybody I got my editing letter back and that I hadn't opened it. And then I essentially got bullied into opening it at writing group. So I went through my first chapter essentially in my writing group, and that kind of got things going for me, at least to where I wasn't so scared of just taking that first step. But when I got that email from my editor and I saw all of those notes and all of the edits and the, red marks on even the first page, I hit this wall of panic and a part of my brain just kind of shut off. I think maybe because I didn't want to sit in the reality of all the work that I still had to do, because it was enough just to get restarted on this project and to finish this project, and I felt so proud of that. And then facing me was this gigantic Word document with so much more work to do. Like, I still wasn't at the summit of this mountain that I was climbing. And that was terrifying, which is silly because I've been here before. I've written several books before and I've published 2, and this is my 3rd, so I feel like I should have been more prepared for what was coming, but I wasn't, and that's okay too. Was I expecting my editor to just give me a glowing review and say that there was nothing to be done and it was fabulous and it's the best piece of work that I had ever written in my entire life? Maybe. But if she had done that, I would have wasted the money that I spent to hire her in the first place. She is there to make my work better. And the fact that she has found things to polish is a good thing, because that is the entire reason that I value her influence on my work. That is what I'm paying an editor for, is to make sure that my work is of the highest caliber that it can be. I am literally paying her to point out the things that are wrong with my work. And when I got that email and she did exactly what I hired her to do, suddenly I was freaked out by that. And I shouldn't be. I was scared that her notes and her edits would prove that maybe I actually didn't know what I was doing. Because when you first get that type of feedback, it kind of is that. It is a confirmation of this negative, quiet voice that you have in the back of your head that you actually have no idea how to write, even when you've written multiple books before. And because that email happened to come when I was in the middle of this kind of doldrum phase, when I was in the middle of this time where I was convincing myself that I didn't know what I was doing, it was kind of, horrible timing. It's very inconvenient when I'm supposed to be at this point where I'm figuring out how to make the work better, where I'm supposed to be paying attention to all of the small issues with it that need fixing. Because right now, I really have to be open to feedback of any kind, because that is what's going to make my work better. So for 2 weeks, essentially, I've been living inside this period of excitement and absolute terror, which is delightful. And that's the entire reason that I wanted to sit down and talk about this, because I really want to shed light on this period of the process of publishing. I kind of think that it happens whether you're an indie published author or a trad published author. I think that this period happens to every artist, even if you're not writing. If you're a creative of any kind that is getting feedback on your work in order to make it better, that is still terrifying. And I want to talk about how I process the edits and get through the anxiety to ultimately make my work better while still keeping my voice intact. So eventually I did open the document, and it was not as bad as I thought it was going to be. Like I said, I dove into this during a writing group night where I was hanging out with all of the writer friends that I have. And that made things a little better. I was still in a really weird mood and I did not want to get into it, but like I said, they bullied me, so there I was. And honestly, I think that was good because I got that first chapter under my belt and was able to, again, take a little bit of a break. I think I took like another day before I dove into it and really got settled into my pace as I go about reviewing the comments that my editor had on the manuscript. And don't get me wrong, there were definitely tough critiques in the notes that she was making and in the suggested changes. But you know, she is there to make my work better, and I have to be okay with that as a possibility. She's not actively trying to tear my book apart. She is trying to find any holes that exist so that I can patch them myself. The only annoying part is that I have to remind myself of that every single time that I sit down to work on edits. But I think taking that week between reading my editor's letter and actually diving into the edits, and even taking a couple days after editing the first chapter and accepting changes and things, that was really good for the whole process. And I'm gonna try and remember that on the next time around. We'll see if that happens, but that is my goal right now. You open the email, you read the editor's letter, and then you pause. And you take a couple days for yourself and you kind of just let it sink in before you commit to the next phase of the process, which is almost as much work as the drafting itself. And in this next phase, I have to come at this with a lot of confidence, because when I'm working through edits that someone else is making on my art, I have to know the tone and the style and the voice that I'm trying to convey, and know my own personal preferences for that, so that I can accept the changes that I think are relevant and reject or manipulate the ones that maybe don't align with what I'm trying to do artistically. And that becomes absolutely essential in this part of the process. I have to know what I am trying to do and remind myself of that in every step of this process. But the good news is that this is where things start to get easier, because as I hit my stride in the edits and as I start getting into the groove of things, I get to remember that this is still my book. This is my book, and this is something that I am creating ultimately for myself, because the books that I write are the books that I want to read. It is still my story and my piece of art that I want to feel like me. I want it to be a reflection of who I am and the things that I have learned and the things that I'm trying to say. Yes, my editor's feedback is there to make my book stronger, but I get to decide how to implement those changes and the level of implementation that I want to embrace. And a big part of that process is understanding the give and take of the feedback from your editor. I get to decide when to fully accept a suggestion and when I want to tweak it to fit my style a little better. My editor has an amazing eye for structure and pacing, but there are some times where she suggests something that I doesn't feel is quite me, and that's okay. And I can either move on without implementing a change entirely, or I find a compromise and try and understand what she was trying to say from her note, and maybe make an edit myself that I feel like is a blend of our two opinions. That is the ultimate way that I take editing feedback and adjust it so that I still feel like it's honoring my personal voice. For instance, I remember on the first book in my trilogy, I used the phrase, "his eyes darkened," which, if you are any romance connoisseur, if you read romance novels of any kind, I feel like you'd be familiar with this phrase. It is very common. And she gave me some note that she didn't know what that meant, and she had never read that before, and that kind of made me question my sanity, because this was an editor who was, again, part of a big trad publishing house, and if she didn't know it, maybe I was insane for even writing it at all. So I had to go dig through my library and sift through a couple romance novels to find the phrase, just to reassure myself that I wasn't insane. And I ultimately kept it in, but that was like a huge learning process for me, because it reminded me that she can give me feedback and I could still like a phrase or the way that I put a sentence together and still stand in my own experience and the thing that I wanted to say. And honestly, this is kind of hilarious to me now, because especially given the rise of book talk and romantasy and things, you'll see that phrase all over the place. I mean, you can just look at Dean Winchester or Geralt from The Witcher and know exactly what "his eyes darkened" meant. But in the moment, I didn't have time for those references, and her comment honestly did kind of make me doubt myself. And I only felt comfortable rejecting that suggestion on that first book after I had found the phrase in other books that I had read, and I felt like I had a little bit of validation. And that was a huge part of the learning process of how you work with an editor for me, because it did teach me that, everything she is telling me that she is suggesting changes for is not always what I want, but it is there to make my work better and to question smaller idiosyncrasies so that I make sure that my book is at a level that I would expect from any book that I pick up off a shelf to read. Which is why it's so important at that point that I really understand what my tone is and what I want to sound like, so that I know and am confident in the fact that I am writing something that I personally would love to read, and I'm writing something that my readers will enjoy reading. Because that's the whole point of editing. It's, a give and take and a balance of feedback that makes your work more professional and an understanding of what you want to convey. And that's really not easy because it requires a deep understanding of who I am and what my art is and what I want it to sound like. And that requires a great deal of self-confidence and understanding of what I'm trying to do artistically, especially when working with an editor who I admire so much and whose work I consider to be like the epitome of professional quality and who is so prolific in her professional career. But I think the key to editing of any kind is to understand that it's about collaboration. She and I are working together. She is not there to rip my work apart necessarily. She is there to give me feedback so that it can be a better piece of art. And that's ultimately what I want when I sit down to hire an editor in the first place. I want my work to be polished and refined and in as best shape as it can possibly be. Her entire job is to highlight my weak spots, and if she wasn't doing that, then I would be wasting my money in hiring a professional editor in the first place. And while her job is to highlight the weaknesses, my job is to take that feedback and use it to make my book stronger while making sure that it still sounds like me. I have to find that sweet spot between her suggestions and my style, which can sometimes be much more difficult than it sounds. And I think when I sat down to start working on edits for this book, maybe because I was a little sensitive because of my hiatus and that this is the final one in this trilogy, it was a little hard to get into the groove of things. Like I said, I was kind of lurching my way through it until I found my pacing. And I found this really beautiful balance between understanding what she was asking of me and understanding what I agreed with. But by the time I was in the middle of the edits, I really hit my stride. I feel like I could feel the things that she wanted from me. And immediately upon seeing any type of edit, I could know very quickly whether or not it was something I was okay with changing, or whether or not it was something I wanted to tweak, or whether or not it was something that I wanted to reject entirely. And that became so much easier once I was fully enmeshed in the manuscript. At the beginning, that's a little harder because it is two different people coming at the same piece of work. And you really have to get a feel for the energy of how they're interpreting the work. That's a really delicate balance. And I think it is one of the main reasons that finding an editor who you identify with and understands your work is so important. If you're trying to work with an editor who maybe doesn't even understand your project to begin with, I feel like that could be exhausting in itself, and that's not really a relationship that I would be super interested in. And I personally am so immensely grateful that I have found someone who I feel like really pushes my work to be the best that it can be, while also understanding what I'm trying to do with the book that I have written. She really knows the exact ways to go about editing my work so that it is up to the standards that I want to portray. So long story short, I think I just wanted to, discuss this process and how I'm going about embracing it. I think a lot of people talk about the practicalities of editing, but not necessarily the emotional labor that goes into this, because there's a lot of time and effort that goes into writing the book, to drafting the book to begin with, but also this phase of the process is almost even harder for me because it requires you opening yourself up to the possibility of improvement. And the mental gymnastics I've had to do in order to get into a place where I, hit my pace with editing and understand that this is just making it better. I have to be okay sitting with the discomfort and letting it pass so that I can get into the work itself. And like I said, I think community has been so important to me in order to move through this process, because as amazing as my husband is, he doesn't exactly give me that type of feedback that I would like in order to push me forward. And I think my writing group has done a lot in order to, make sure that I am honoring my work and honoring the time that I've put in and not ignoring things that need to happen for my work to become better. So if you are staring at your editor's email and are too scared to open it, I want you to know that that is normal. And maybe I will come back and watch this myself once I get to this phase on my next book, because who knows, maybe I will forget it even then. But once you get into the work and start working through the edits and learn to trust your editor and learn to trust yourself, it will become so much easier. You just have to believe in the work that you're trying to create and lean into your style and your tone and find your rhythm, because it will get easier after that. And at the end of the day, this is all about just making my book better. And I have to embrace that idea. I have to get excited for the process of refinement, because this is really where I am making my work shine. I am polishing it, and it is the first step in the final phase of the publishing process. And that is exciting in and of itself. If you found this video helpful, please hit that like and subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all the new videos I'm putting out about indie author life and indie publishing. And let me know in the comments below if you have an approach to your editing that is different than mine, or if you have an opinion on this, or if you've been through the process, or if you're looking for an editor. I really hope that we can all demystify the process and learn from each other about how we go about encountering these phases and working through them. But now I have to move on to the next phase in the process, which is another copy editing pass. Arguably the worst phase in the publishing process for me, but it is essential to catch any final lingering details, and then I will be moving on to formatting. So it's really exciting, and I think I'll make some more videos about that, but wish me luck. Until next time, I will see you around. Bye.